Hey everyone, just back again with another Maze Magician video. The other three videos are still relevant, but this will be the newest and most up-to-date version as of version 3.0.0. The other ones were made quite a while back, and there are some new features since then, which is why we're on the exciting version 3. But I'm going to jump right into it, just add a maze generator to the scene like always. The first thing you'll notice that's different is that there's a two-dimensional option as well as the standard three-dimensional generation I was doing before. When you select the two-dimensional option, your inspector is going to change a little bit. The gizmo is going to reorient itself, so it'll be upright as opposed to down on the ground. I'm going to set the maze width and length a little bit higher, and I'm going to set my wall plane a little bit in front of the floor plane. The reason I'm going to do this is that if we set our player to the same plane as the walls, they'll be able to interact with the walls but be above the floor, which is kind of what we typically want in this type of scenario. In the example folder, I've included some basic prefabs to play around with. I've cheated a little bit because I'm using planes and empty game objects to orient them correctly. Really, you should be using sprites. But this is just a quick and dirty solution. If we add some details, I've cheated here too. I'm using spheres as opposed to circle sprites like I should. I've preset everything at 1 by 1, and I'm going to put these on the same layer as the walls and the theoretical player so that they could interact with these objects as well. They could be coins or whatever you want, really. And we'll make these as extreme as possible, still clamping them to a specific tile. And these values can never go outside of a range where the object would intersect with other tiles or end up partially inside the wall, assuming you have your settings correct here and at the top for your actual tile width and length. And let's just generate one on every tile. Why not? We'll set the frequency to 1. Delete some dead ends. We'll make the floor exit, which may or may not be as useful as it is in a three-dimensional maze, but you can always just disable it if you don't want it. We'll make a little 5 by 5 starting area, roughly the center of the maze. And something else you're going to see here is the allow, undo, and editor. We're going to check that off, and I'll show you what it does in a sec. So when we generate this maze, you notice we get our wall pieces with our 2D colliders and the little spheres generated everywhere, just like you would with a 3D maze, only in 2 dimensions and oriented differently, obviously, since this is on the XY plane as opposed to the XZ plane like I would do with a three-dimensional maze. And I can generate a maze a few times, and now that I've checked this allow, undo, and editor box off, I can use Unity's built-in undo functionality to go back, or I could redo and go forward in what I've generated. The major problem with this is that every single maze is going to get stored in its entirety in memory. So after you've generated a few mazes, especially large mazes, Unity can start using up a lot of RAM. I've gotten upwards of like 15 gigabytes when I was testing this out. So I don't really recommend it unless you're just playing around, but if you do end up using it, you're going to want to get to a point where you're happy with what you have, save it, close Unity, and then reopen Unity, and all that memory will be cleared. And then you can just leave this unchecked, and it won't be adding to your memory. Another thing you probably noticed on my way down was the seed value right here. So this seed value is red at the time the maze is generated. But if I want to use a custom seed value, set this to whatever I want, it's going to generate everything the exact same every time. The walls are going to be in the same places. The objects that are placed are going to be in the same positions with the same orientation. Nothing's going to change. This makes it really efficient when you're doing a multiplayer game, because previously you had to save the maze as a .mazemap file, and then pass this file or elements of this file over a network. Now all you have to do is pass this integer value, and it'll generate the exact same maze. Given, of course, that you've set up the details and the walls the same way, and you have the same data here to pull from. And the same size of maze as well. Obviously, if you're changing the size, that changes more elements of generation. But assuming your generator is set up the same seed value will produce consistent results, so you can pass that over a network instead of just passing 30 kilobytes or 15 kilobytes or however big your maze map file is. That file size doesn't seem like a lot, but at the end of the day, the less you have to pass over a network, the better. I've actually thought about going to a seed value only saving and loading system, but there are some people who like the ability to pull all that data, to pull uh, the maze maps out of the file and the positions of individual objects and stuff like that. So for now, the saving and loading functionality will remain unchanged. Now if we go to a three-dimensional maze, because this is going to show up a little bit better there, I have something else I want to show off. Let's make something relatively big, 100 by 100. And let's snap the main camera to my viewpoint here. I've set up some incremental generation. Don't need these. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to have a maze we can generate at runtime. Up to now, the maze has been generated all in one frame, which makes it very unwieldy for runtime generation. Basically everything has had to be pre-generated in the editor and then instantiated as a prefab or pre-added to a scene. Otherwise, you would have a few seconds where your player's frozen wondering what the heck's going on. I've created a quick script here that's not going to be included with the actual package, but all it's doing is it's calling mazeGenerator.generate new maze incremental and passing in an integer. That integer you pass in is the number of calculations or instantiations that happen per second. The lower this number, the slower the maze is going to generate, but the less of a hit your frame rate's going to take. The higher this number, the more of a hit your frame rate's going to take, but the faster the maze is going to generate. I'm just going to set it to a nice middle of the road 50. And then when I press G after this is all running, it should start generating the maze. So I'm going to press G now. You notice because I've used 50, the frame rate really hasn't been affected at all. If I use a higher number, the frame rate would be affected more. And now it's going to go and instantiate all these objects. So this is really nice during runtime because your player is not going to experience much of a hit in their frame rate. You'll notice my frame rate is dropped now, but that's because we're looking at over 15,000 game objects with colliders and shadows from this directional light. And that is what's hurting our frame rate right now. It doesn't matter if I've saved all these draw calls by batching, there is still a performance cost to this. Now, if we use a runtime occlusion culling solution or bake our occlusion culling in the editor, we're going to notice drastic improvement in drastic performance increases because the player is going to be down in this maze. They're only going to see a handful of game objects, 30 or 40 at a time, and everything else is going to be culled. So that's a really good way if you want to make larger mazes and you have the ability to pre-generate them and bake your occlusion culling or use a runtime occlusion culling solution, you'll notice some good performance increases. So hopefully this has helped you out with some of the new features that are in here. But if you have any questions, make sure to contact me via email or any suggestions for improvements. The reason we have this two-dimensional generation is because of one of my users suggesting it to me. So as always, I'm always looking for feedback, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.